The blood bank was being robbed when Mira Vaughn realized she'd been teaching sign language to the wrong twin all along. She stood frozen in the sterile hallway of St. Catherine's Community Center, her canvas bag slipping from her shoulder as three figures in dark suits moved through the medical wing with predatory grace. They weren't human. She knew that instantly, the way prey knows when a predator enters the room. Their skin was too pale, almost luminescent under the fluorescent lights, and their hair gleamed white as moonlight. But what made her breath catch wasn't their otherworldly beauty, or the way they moved like liquid shadow. It was the fact that one of them was Dimitri. Except Dimitri was supposed to be upstairs in her classroom right now, waiting for their evening session. Dimitri, who was deaf, who came twice a week to learn advanced sign language, who smiled shyly and brought her coffee in mismatched mugs he claimed to find at thrift stores. Dimitri, who had never mentioned he had a twin brother, or that he was a vampire, or that his brother was apparently stealing blood from the community center's donation reserves. The man who looked exactly like Dimitri turned his head, and his eyes locked onto hers. They were different from Dimitri's soft gray gaze. These eyes burned crimson, ancient and commanding, and when his lips curved into something between amusement and interest, Mira saw fangs. She should have run. Every survival instinct screamed at her to turn and sprint for the exit. Instead, her hands moved automatically, signing before her brain could stop her. "What are you doing?" The vampire's expression shifted from amusement to shock. His companions, both similarly pale and regal, froze mid-step. The air in the hallway grew thick with tension. "You know sign language," the vampire who wasn't Dimitri said aloud, his voice a rich baritone with an accent she couldn't place. "Eastern European maybe, Old World." "How?" "Interesting. Lucian, we need to move," one of the others hissed. A woman with silver hair piled high on her head, wearing a crimson dress that looked like it cost more than Mira's yearly salary. "The council will have sensed our presence." But Lucian wasn't listening. He moved toward Mira with that same liquid grace, closing the distance between them in seconds. Up close, he was even more beautiful than Dimitri, harder somehow, all sharp edges and dangerous angles where his brother was soft curves and gentle smiles. They were identical in feature but opposite in energy. "You teach Dimitri," Lucian said, and it wasn't a question. His eyes searched her face with an intensity that made her head skin burn. "My brother speaks of you constantly. Mira Vaughn, the patient teacher who doesn't judge, who makes him feel normal." "Your brother," Mira's voice came out steadier than she felt. "He never mentioned having a twin, or being a vampire, or that his brother was a blood thief, not theft." Lucian's jaw tightened. "Retrieval. This blood was taken from my people without consent, sold on the black market to humans who think vampire blood grants immortality. It doesn't. It just kills them slowly, painfully. We're taking back what's ours." The woman vampire appeared at Lucian's shoulder. "My lord, please, we don't have time for explanations to a human." "My lord?" Mira's eyes widened. "You're not just a vampire, you're the vampire king of the Eastern Territories," Lucian confirmed, his gaze never leaving hers. "And you, Mira Vaughn, are either going to scream and bring security running, or you're going to be reasonable about this. Which will it be?" Mira's mind raced. Everything about this situation was insane. Vampires were real. Her sweet, shy student was apparently vampire royalty. His brother, who looked exactly like him but radiated danger like heat from a furnace, was stealing blood from the community center while calling it retrieval. And she was standing here having a conversation instead of running for her life. "Dimitri's upstairs," she said finally. "Waiting for our lesson. Does he know you're here?" Something flickered across Lucian's face. Pain maybe, or regret. "My brother and I, we don't see each other often. He chose a different life, a quieter one. I respect that, even if I don't understand it. Because he's deaf?" The words came out sharper than Mira intended. "Because he's different?" Lucian's eyes flashed. "Because he's vulnerable in a world that would destroy him for showing weakness. Deafness is rare among vampires, nearly unheard of in the royal bloodline. There are those who would see it as a flaw, a sign of corrupted blood. I have enemies who would use him to get to me." "So you avoid him, to protect him?" Mira's hands moved as she spoke, signing her words automatically. It was a habit she'd developed since working with Dimitri, making her communication accessible even when she spoke aloud. "That's the loneliest protection I've ever heard of." Lucian watched her hands with rapt attention. "You sign when you speak, even though I can hear you." "Habit," Mira said. "Dimitri taught me that communication isn't just about being understood. It's about making sure everyone in the conversation feels included, valued. He's the wisest person I've ever met, vampire or human." The third vampire, a tall man with a stern face and a scar cutting through his pale eyebrows, spoke for the first time. "The blood is secured. We need to leave now." But Lucian still hadn't moved. He was staring at Mira like she was a puzzle he desperately needed to solve. You care about my brother. I can see it in the way you speak of him, the way you automatically sign even when speaking to those who can hear. You've made him feel less alone. He's my student, Mira said, though they both knew it was more than that. Dimitri had become her friend over the past 6 months, one of the few bright spots in her underpaid, overworked life as a teacher at the community center. And if you're taking blood and leaving, fine. I didn't see anything. But Dimitri's waiting upstairs, and I won't leave him sitting alone, admirable. Lucian's voice held genuine respect. But foolish. You've seen us, seen what we are. You've seen me take blood from a human facility. You understand that I can't let you simply walk away. Mira's heart hammered against her ribs, but she lifted her chin. Then what? You'll kill me? Right here in the community center where your brother comes to feel safe? Where he's built a life away from vampire politics and royal expectations? That's going to make his life better? The stern vampire muttered something in a language Mira didn't recognize. It sounded old, guttural. Lucian responded in the same tongue, sharp and commanding. I'm not going to kill you, Lucian said finally, switching back to English. His eyes softened almost imperceptibly. But I am going to have to ask you to come with us, just until we're certain you won't report this to human authorities. A few hours, perhaps a day. You'll be treated well, kept safe. That's kidnapping. That's survival. Lucian's voice held an edge of steel. I have a responsibility to my people, to maintain the secrecy that keeps us all alive. Humans outnumber us thousands to one. If they knew we existed, truly knew and understood, they would hunt us to extinction. And if I refuse, then I'll have to use compulsion, and I'd rather not. It's invasive, uncomfortable, and leaves you feeling violated. His honesty was unexpected. Please don't make me do that to someone my brother cares about. Mira thought about Dimitri upstairs, probably checking his watch now, wondering where she was. She thought about her tiny apartment, her mountain of student loan debt, her cat who would need feeding. She thought about calling the police, trying to explain that vampires had stolen blood from the donation center, knowing she'd sound insane. 2 hours, she said. I'll come with you for 2 hours. You explain everything, convince me this isn't some insane crime spree, and then you let me go back to my life. And Dimitri never knows about this. He doesn't need to know his brother is putting himself in danger. Lucian's smile was sharp and approving. Brave, intelligent, and protective. I see why Dimitri speaks so highly of you. Very well, 2 hours. But we leave now, and you come quietly. The woman vampire produced a long coat from somewhere, draping it over Mira's shoulders. It was heavy, lined with silk, and smelled like night air and something spicy she couldn't identify. Before Mira could protest, they were moving, Lucian's hand firm but not painful on her elbow as he guided her toward the emergency exit. The last thing she saw before the door closed behind them was her classroom door on the 2nd floor. Light spilling out into the hallway, and she wondered if Dimitri was watching, if he somehow knew that his carefully separated worlds were colliding. The car waiting for them wasn't what Mira expected. She'd pictured something sleek and modern, all tinted windows and luxury. Instead, it was a vintage Rolls-Royce, midnight black with silver fixtures, looking like it had rolled straight out of the 1920s except for the fact that it purred to life with modern efficiency. Lucian guided her into the back seat, sliding in beside her while the stern vampire took the driver's seat and the woman sat in the front passenger side. The interior smelled of leather and old wood, and the seats were so soft Mira sank into them despite her anxiety. Where are we going? She asked as the car pulled smoothly away from the community center. Somewhere safe, Lucian replied. He'd pulled out a phone, sleek and modern, incongruous in his pale hands. He was texting rapidly, his expression tense. Somewhere we can talk properly. I have a cat, Mira said suddenly. Mr. Fitzgerald. He needs to be fed by 7 or he'll knock everything off my kitchen counters in protest. Lucian's lips twitched. We'll make sure your cat is fed. My assistant will send someone. Your assistant. Right. Because vampire kings have assistants. We have entire courts, actually. Advisors, guards, diplomats, historians. Being immortal doesn't exempt us from bureaucracy, unfortunately. If anything, we've had centuries to make it more complicated. The woman vampire turned in her seat, studying Mira with cold assessment. I am Serafina Lucian, advisor to the crown, and you are either very brave or very foolish to have negotiated with the king. Probably both, Mira admitted. But I'm not going to apologize for protecting my students' peace of mind. Dimitri doesn't need to know about any of this. Dimitri knows more than you think, Lucian said quietly. He knows what I am, what we are. He chose to leave the court 20 years ago, to live among humans, to pretend he could be something other than vampire royalty. But he knows. 20 years ago? Mira looked at Lucian more carefully. He looked no older than 30, but his eyes held centuries. How old are you? I was born in 1347, Lucian said simply. In what is now Romania, though it had a different name then. Dimitri and I are 679 years old, give or take a few years. We lost count around the 3rd century. Mira's brain stuttered over the number. 679 years. Dimitri, who brought her coffee and smiled shyly and struggled with modern slang, was older than entire countries. That's impossible, and yet here we are. Lucian's voice held dark amusement. Impossible creatures having an impossible conversation. The world is far stranger than most humans realize, Mira Vaughn. The car turned down a street Mira didn't recognize, then descended into what looked like a parking garage. But the garage kept going down, level after level, far deeper than any normal structure should go. The air grew cooler, and Mira realized they were going underground. Where are we? She asked, trying to keep the tremor from her voice. Beneath the city, Lucian said. There's an entire world down here, has been for centuries. Vampire territories exist parallel to human cities, hidden in plain sight. We've learned to adapt, to survive in the shadows of your society. The garage opened into a vast cavern and Mira's breath caught. It was a city, a real city, carved from stone and illuminated by thousands of lights that glowed with soft, warm radiance. Buildings rose in elegant spirals, their architecture a blend of Gothic grandeur and modern efficiency. Vampires moved through the streets below, all pale-skinned and white-haired, dressed in everything from ancient formal wear to contemporary fashion. Welcome to Noctis, Serafina said, and there was pride in her voice. The Eastern Court. They drove through streets of polished stone, past buildings that looked like palaces, markets where vendors sold things Mira couldn't identify, parks with trees that glowed with bioluminescent bark. Vampires stopped to stare as the Rolls-Royce passed, and many bowed their heads in respect. They knew this car, knew who rode inside. The palace, because that's what it was, rose at the heart of the underground city. It was all spires and arched windows, carved from some dark stone that seemed to absorb and reflect light simultaneously. Guards in formal uniforms flanked the entrance, snapping to attention as Lucian emerged from the car. He offered Mira his hand, helping her out with old-world courtesy that would have been charming if she wasn't being kidnapped. This way, he said, we have much to discuss. Inside, the palace was breathtaking. Marble floors stretched in vast halls, illuminated by crystal chandeliers that cast rainbow light across everything. Tapestries depicting ancient battles hung on the walls, and servants in crisp uniforms moved with quiet efficiency. Everything spoke of wealth, power, and centuries of accumulated grandeur. Lucian led her to a private study, dismissing the guards with a gesture. The room was smaller than she expected, lined with books in dozens of languages. A fire crackling in an ornate fireplace. He gestured to a chair near the fire, and Mira sat, grateful for the warmth. I'll have food brought, Lucian said, pouring something amber into a crystal glass and offering it to her. You're safe here, you have my word, the word of a vampire king. Mira accepted the glass but didn't drink. Forgive me if I'm not entirely reassured. Fair. Lucian poured himself a glass and sat across from her. Let me explain then. The blood we retrieved tonight was stolen from willing vampire donors and sold on the black market. Humans buy it believing it will extend their lives, make them stronger, more beautiful. What it actually does is poison them slowly. Vampire blood isn't meant for human consumption. It's toxic, addictive. Those who drink it die within months, sometimes weeks, depending on the dosage, so you were saving human lives by stealing it back, in part. We also can't have vampire blood circulating in human markets. It raises questions, invites investigation. Secrecy is our greatest defense. Mira finally took a sip of the drink. It was brandy, smooth and expensive. Why is Dimitri deaf? You said it's rare. Lucian's expression darkened. We don't know. He was born that way, the only vampire in recorded history to be born without hearing. Our kind usually has enhanced senses, everything heightened beyond human capability. But Dimitri, he paused, and the pain in his voice was raw. He was seen as flawed, broken. There were calls to have him executed as an infant to prevent corrupted blood from spreading through the royal line. That's monstrous. That's politics. Lucian's voice turned bitter. My parents protected him, kept him safe within the palace walls. But the court never accepted him. He was mocked, dismissed, treated as an embarrassment. When he was old enough, he left. He said he'd rather live among humans who didn't know enough to judge him than among vampires who should have known better. And you let him go. I didn't have a choice. He was miserable here, and I was powerless to change the court's attitude. I had just taken the crown after our father's death, and I was fighting to maintain control. I couldn't protect him the way he needed. Lucian stared into the fire. So I let him leave, and I've spent the past 2 decades making sure he stays safe from a distance. Guards he doesn't know about, resources funneled through accounts he thinks are human charities. everything I could do without interfering in the life he chose. That's why you're so protective, Mira said slowly, understanding dawning. You couldn't protect him from your own people, so now you protect him from everything else. He's my brother, my twin. We shared the womb, grew up together, learned to fight and read and rule side by side. Losing him to the human world was like losing half my soul. Lucian's voice was barely above a whisper, but he's happy there, happier than he ever was here, and his happiness matters more than my loneliness. Mira's heart ached for both of them. Brothers separated by a world that couldn't accept difference, both suffering in their own ways. He talks about you sometimes, she said gently. He doesn't use your name, but he mentions having a brother. He says you used to sign to him even before he learned formal sign language, that you invented your own signs as children. Lucian's eyes gleamed with unshed tears. We had our own language, yes. Before we knew there were formal systems, we created our own ways to communicate. He was never broken to me, never flawed. He was just Dimitri, my brother, my twin, my best friend. Why don't you visit him? Because every time I'm near him, I put him at risk. My enemies watch me constantly, looking for weaknesses. If they knew how much I care for him, if they understood that he's my greatest vulnerability. Lucian's hands clenched around his glass. They would hurt him to hurt me. They would use him as leverage. Or worse, the only way to keep him truly safe is to stay away. A knock at the door interrupted them. A servant entered with a tray of food, setting it on the table between them. Fresh fruit, cheese, bread that smelled like heaven. Mira realized she was starving, her dinner plans forgotten in the chaos of the evening. Eat, Lucian encouraged. You're safe here, I promise. As Mira ate, Lucian asked her about teaching, about her work at the community center. She found herself relaxing despite everything, talking about her students, the challenges of underfunding, her dreams of opening a dedicated school for deaf education. He listened with genuine interest, asking intelligent questions, and she found herself forgetting she was talking to a creature who'd lived for nearly 7 centuries. You could do it, Lucian said when she mentioned her school dream. With proper funding, you could open a facility that would change lives. Proper funding doesn't just appear out of thin air, Mira said wryly. I'm barely making rent. A school is a fantasy, not necessarily. Lucian leaned forward, his eyes intense. The vampire community has resources, more than we could spend in a dozen lifetimes. We could fund your school, provide everything you need. In exchange, you keep our secret. Help us when we need someone who understands both our world and yours. You're offering to buy my silence with a school? I'm offering to help you achieve your dreams while creating a bridge between our peoples. We need human allies, Mira. People who understand what we are but don't fear or hate us. People who see us as individuals rather than monsters. You already see Dimitri that way. You could learn to see all of us that way. It was tempting, dangerously so. A fully funded school would change everything, not just for her but for hundreds of students. But accepting would mean binding herself to the vampire world, to secrets and shadows and dangers she couldn't begin to imagine. I need time, she said, to think about this, to process everything. Of course. Lucian stood, offering his hand. It's been more than 2 hours. I'll have you driven home. But Mira, please consider my offer. And please, tell Dimitri I asked about him. Tell him I think of him every day. Tell him yourself, Mira said impulsively. Come to the community center. See him. Talk to him. Maybe he needs protection, but he also needs his brother. It's not that simple. It never is. But that doesn't mean it's not worth trying. Lucian looked at her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. You're extraordinary. Do you know that? Brave enough to negotiate with a vampire king, compassionate enough to care about the loneliness of immortal brothers, and idealistic enough to think we can simply fix things by talking. Dimitri was right to speak so highly of you. Heat crept up Mira's cheeks. I'm just a teacher who stumbled into something way over her head. No, Lucian said softly. You're someone who sees people, really sees them, regardless of what they are. That's rarer and more valuable than you know. The drive home was quiet, Mira exhausted and overwhelmed by everything she'd learned. True to Lucian's word, Mr. Fitzgerald had been fed, a note on expensive cardstock left on her counter. Your cat has been fed and provided with fresh water. He knocked over 3 mugs in protest before we arrived. He is a creature of refined chaos. Mira laughed despite herself, imagining some vampire assistant dealing with her temperamental cat. The normalcy of it, the absurdity, made the whole night feel surreal. She slept poorly, dreaming of underground cities and pale kings and brothers separated by centuries of pain. When she woke, she checked her phone obsessively, half expecting some sign that last night had been real. Instead, she found a single text from an unknown number. Thank you for caring about my brother. If you ever need anything at all, call this number. LA teaching was impossible that day. Mira went through the motions, her mind miles away in an underground palace. When evening came and Dimitri arrived for their session, she felt guilty, like she was carrying a secret that would hurt him if revealed. But Dimitri was his usual sweet self, smiling as he settled into his seat, signing greetings with practiced ease. They worked on advanced vocabulary, on idioms and expressions that didn't always translate well to sign. He was a dedicated student, patient with himself when he struggled, celebrating small victories with genuine joy. "You seem distracted," Dimitri signed during a break. "Everything okay?" Mira hesitated, then signed back, "Just tired, long night." He studied her with those soft gray eyes, so like Lucian's in feature but entirely different in expression. "If you ever need to talk, I'm here. You've done so much for me. I'd like to help if I can." The kindness of it, the genuine offer of support from someone who had every reason to be closed off to the world, made Mira's eyes sting. "Thank you," she signed. "That means more than you know." They finished the session, and as Dimitri was packing up, Mira made a decision. "Your brother says hello," she signed. "He thinks of you every day." Dimitri froze, his hands stilling mid-motion. "You've spoken to Lucian? Last night? It's complicated. But he wanted you to know." Dimitri's expression cycled through shock, confusion, and something that might have been hope. "He actually said that? He thinks of me? He said losing you was like losing half his soul." Tears gathered in Dimitri's eyes. "I didn't think he cared anymore. He never visits, never calls. I thought once I left the court, I became just another subject he had to manage from a distance. He stays away to protect you," Mira signed gently. "He thinks his enemies would use you to hurt him. He thinks distance keeps you safe." "Safe and alone," Dimitri signed, his hands sharp with frustration. "I left the court to escape judgment, not to escape him. He was the only one who ever made me feel like I belonged." "Then tell him that, talk to him." "It's not that simple. Everyone keeps saying that," Mira interrupted. "But maybe it is. Maybe sometimes the simple answer is the right one, even if it's scary." Dimitri looked at her for a long moment, then signed. "How did you meet him? How did you end up talking to the Vampire King?" So Mira told him, signing and speaking simultaneously, explaining the blood retrieval, the negotiation, the underground city. Dimitri listened with growing amazement, occasionally interrupting with questions, his expression shifting from shock to amusement to something like pride. "You negotiated with Lucian?" he signed when she finished. "And won. Do you know how rare that is? He's one of the most powerful vampires in existence. Kings from other territories are terrified of him." "He didn't seem terrifying," Mira admitted. "Just lonely, and determined to protect you. He's both those things. And dangerous, and brilliant, and carrying the weight of an entire civilization on his shoulders." Dimitri's signs were fond despite the heavy words. He became king too young, in the middle of a succession crisis. He spent centuries proving himself, eliminating threats, building alliances. He doesn't get to be soft or vulnerable or make mistakes. Everyone watches him constantly, waiting for him to show weakness. That sounds exhausting. It is. But it's who he is. He was born to rule, trained for it from childhood. Even when we were young, I could see it in him. He had this presence, this certainty. People followed him naturally. Dimitri smiled sadly. "I was never like that. I was always the broken one, the weakness in the royal line." "You're not broken," Mira signed firmly. "You're different, and difference isn't a flaw. Try telling that to vampire nobility." "I will if I get the chance." Dimitri laughed to sound rusty but genuine. "I believe you would. You're either the bravest or most foolish human I've ever met. Second person to tell me that in 24 hours. They talked longer than usual, Dimitri sharing stories about growing up in the vampire court, about the loneliness of being different in a society that prized uniformity and strength. Mira shared her own stories of feeling different, of growing up poor in a world that assumed teaching was a passion that could survive without proper pay, of dreaming bigger than her circumstances allowed. By the time Dimitri left, something had shifted between them. They were no longer just teacher and student. They were friends, real friends, bound by shared understanding of what it meant to exist on the margins. Over the next week, Mira tried to return to normal life. She taught her classes, fed her cat, paid her bills that she could barely afford. But normalcy felt like a costume that no longer fit. She'd seen too much, learned too much. The vampire world existed beneath her feet, and she couldn't unknow it. Lucian texted occasionally, brief messages asking if she was well, if she needed anything, if she'd thought about his offer. She hadn't responded, unsure what to say. The offer was tempting, but accepting felt like stepping off a cliff without knowing what waited below. Then, on a Thursday evening, Dimitri didn't show up for their session. At first, Mira wasn't worried. Students canceled sometimes, got held up at work, dealt with emergencies. But as minutes stretched into an hour with no message, no call, anxiety began to creep in. Dimitri was never late, never missed a session without advance notice. She tried calling, straight to voicemail. She tried texting, no response. Finally, with hands shaking slightly, she pulled out the card with Lucian's private number and called. He answered on the first ring. Mira? What's wrong? Dimitri didn't show up for our session. He's not answering his phone. That's not like him. Silence, heavy and tense. Then, where are you? The community center. Stay there. Lock the doors. Don't let anyone in except me. I'm coming now. The call ended and Mira's anxiety spiked into full-blown fear. Lucian's tone had been sharp, commanding, and underlying it was something that sounded like panic. She locked the doors as instructed, turning off the main lights so the center looked closed. Then she waited, pacing the classroom, checking her phone obsessively. 20 minutes felt like 20 hours. When Lucian arrived, he wasn't alone. Serafina was with him, along with 3 vampires Mira didn't recognize, all wearing dark clothes and moving with military precision. They looked like soldiers, and the weapons they carried were very real. Tell me everything, Lucian demanded, his eyes blazing crimson. When did you last see him? Did he mention anything unusual? Any strange encounters? Mira explained, her words tumbling over each other. Their last session, Dimitri's normal behavior, the lack of warning about tonight's absence. Someone took him, Lucian said flatly. They waited until he was vulnerable, away from my protection. They took him to get to me. Who would do that? Varric Draken. Serafina spat the name like a curse. Leader of the Western Territories. He's been pushing for war, claiming Lucian's rule is weak, that the Eastern Court has grown soft. Taking Dimitri would prove his point, show that even the king's own blood isn't safe. We need to find him, Mira said, her voice steadier than she felt. Now we will. Lucian's face was carved from ice, beautiful and terrible. I'll burn the Western Territories to ash if I have to. Varric made a mistake touching my brother. Let me come with you. Everyone stared at her. Lucian's expression softened fractionally. Absolutely not. This will be dangerous, likely violent. You're human, fragile. I won't risk you. Dimitri trusts me. If he's scared, if he's hurt, seeing a familiar face might help. I know sign language. I can communicate with him in ways your people might not think of. Mira lifted her chin. And you owe me for that night at the blood bank. You said I could call in a favor if I needed anything. I'm calling it in now. Let me help find Dimitri. Lucian looked like he wanted to argue, but something in her expression stopped him. Fine, but you stay close to me at all times. You follow orders without question, and if I tell you to run, you run. Understood? Understood. They moved quickly after that, Lucian making calls in rapid-fire Romanian, coordinating with his guards, gathering intelligence. Apparently, the vampire underground had its own communication networks, spies and informants who traded in secrets. Within an hour, they had a location. An abandoned warehouse on the edge of the city, in an industrial district that had been empty for decades. It's a trap, Serafina said flatly. Varric wants you to come. He's counting on your emotional response, your need to save Dimitri. He'll have forces waiting. I don't care if he has an army, Lucian replied, his voice deadly calm. He took my brother. He dies tonight. The warehouse was exactly as foreboding as Mira imagined. Rusted metal walls, broken windows, graffiti covering every surface. They approached under cover of darkness, Lucian's guards fanning out in practiced formation. Mira stayed close to Lucian, her heart hammering so hard she was sure every vampire could hear it. Inside the warehouse was cavernous and dark. Moonlight filtered through the broken roof, casting strange shadows across empty space. And in the center, tied to a chair with silver chains that burned his skin where they touched, was Dimitri. He looked up as they entered, his gray eyes widening with fear and hope. His mouth moved, forming words he couldn't hear, and Mira's heart broke at the desperation in his expression.
Dimitri?
Lucian started forward, but Serafina grabbed his arm.
Wait, where are the guards? The ambush?
She was right, the warehouse was empty except for Dimitri. No Varric, no Western Territory vampires. No trap springing shut. Just Dimitri bound and alone. Mira moved before she could think better of it, crossing the space toward Dimitri. His eyes locked onto hers and his hands moved in frantic signs. Trap, run, not safe. I know, she signed back. We're getting you out. Lucian was beside her then, his hands working at the silver chains despite the way they burned his skin. The smell of scorched flesh filled the air, but he didn't stop, didn't even flinch. Serafina and the guards formed a protective circle around them, weapons drawn. This is too easy, Serafina muttered. Varric wouldn't just leave him here. She was right, of course. The explosion came from below, a deafening roar that cracked the concrete floor. The warehouse began to collapse, metal beams shrieking as they twisted and fell. Lucian grabbed Dimitri, chains and all, and lunged for the exit. Serafina grabbed Mira, moving with supernatural speed that made Mira's stomach lurch. They burst out into the night as the warehouse imploded behind them, a cloud of dust and debris mushrooming into the sky. Mira's ears rang, her lungs burned, but she was alive. They were all alive. "Get them to the cars," Lucian ordered. "Now." But before they could move, figures emerged from the shadows, dozens of them, pale-skinned and white-haired, surrounding them in a loose circle. Leading them was a vampire who could only be Varric Dracon. He was tall, broader than Lucian, with scars crossing his face and an expression of cruel amusement. "Lucian Ashford," Varric's voice boomed across the space. "How kind of you to come, and you brought your broken little brother. How touching." Lucian set Dimitri down carefully, positioning himself between his brother and Varric. "This ends now, Varric. Call off your people and I might let you live." "Let me live?" Varric laughed. "You're outnumbered 5-1. Your precious guards are skilled, but they're not enough. Tonight, the Eastern Territories fall. Tonight, I prove your rule is weak, that you care more about your defective brother than your kingdom. Tonight," Lucian said, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper, "you learn why I'm king." What happened next was so fast Mira could barely track it. Lucian moved like lightning, crossing the space between him and Varric in a blink. They collided with bone-shattering force, Varric's arrogant expression shifting to shock. Around them, the battle erupted. Serafina and the guards engaged Varric's forces with brutal efficiency. Mira dropped to her knees beside Dimitri, working at his chains with shaking hands. The silver burned her too, less severely than it burned vampires, but painful nonetheless. Dimitri's hands moved frantically. "You shouldn't be here. Danger, humans are fragile." "Shut up and hold still," she signed back, managing to get one chain loose. Dimitri's expression shifted to something between exasperation and affection. "Stubborn. You have no idea." The fight raged around them. Lucian and Varric were locked in combat that looked more like a force of nature than a fight between two individuals. They moved faster than Mira's eyes could follow, every strike powerful enough to crack stone. Lucian fought with cold precision, no wasted movement, every attack calculated. But Varric was strong, experienced, and fighting dirty. When Varric pulled a wooden stake, ancient and dark with age, Mira's breath caught. Everyone knew wood was deadly to vampires, could kill them if it pierced the heart. Varric lunged, the stake aimed for Lucian's chest. Lucian dodged, but barely, the stake slicing across his ribs instead of plunging into his heart. Blood bloomed across his white shirt, black in the moonlight. He stumbled, and Varric pressed his advantage, driving Lucian back toward the burning warehouse. "No." Dimitri's voice was raw, desperate. He'd gotten free of the chains somehow, was struggling to his feet despite his burns. Mira saw it then, the opening. Varric's focus was entirely on Lucian, his back to where she and Dimitri stood. And near her feet, dropped in the chaos, was a piece of rebar, sharp and heavy. She didn't think. Thinking was dangerous. She grabbed the rebar and ran. Varric never saw her coming. She swung the metal bar with all her strength, connecting with the back of his knee. It wasn't enough to seriously hurt a vampire, but it was enough to surprise him, to disrupt his balance. Lucian took the opportunity instantly, his hand shooting out to grab Varric's wrist, twisting until bones snapped and the stake fell. "You let a human defend you?" Varric spat, his voice filled with contempt even as Lucian forced him to his knees. "You've become soft, pathetic. You let weakness into your court." "She's not weakness," Lucian said, his voice carrying across the battlefield. "She's courage, something you've never understood." He didn't kill Varric, not immediately. Instead, he looked to his guards, to Varric's forces who had stopped fighting, watching their leader subdued. "The challenge is over. Varric Dracon attempted to overthrow the Eastern Territories through kidnapping and terrorism. The penalty is exile, permanent exile from all vampire territories. He'll be taken beyond our borders and released into the human world with no protection, no resources, no way to return. Any who follow him will face the same fate." It was a mercy, Mira realized. He could have killed Varric, would have been justified in doing so. But he chose exile instead, chose a punishment that avoided more bloodshed. It was the decision of a king, not a warrior. Varric's forces withdrew, dragging their leader away into the darkness. Serafina was giving orders, coordinating cleanup, ensuring no human authorities would investigate the destroyed warehouse too closely. And Dimitri was standing now, moving toward Lucian with halting steps. The brothers stared at each other, 20 years of separation hanging between them. Then Dimitri's hands moved, signing slowly so Lucian could follow. "You came for me. You risked everything. Always." Lucian signed back, his movements less practiced than his brother's but filled with emotion. "I will always come for you. Distance doesn't change that. It never did." Dimitri closed the space between them, and they embraced, two identical figures clinging to each other like they could make up for decades of loneliness in a single moment. Mira felt tears on her cheeks, moved by the raw emotion of their reunion. Later, after the chaos had settled, they all returned to the underground palace. Healers treated Dimitri's burns, gave Mira ointment for her blistered hands. Lucian had changed shirts, the wound on his ribs already healing thanks to vampire physiology. They gathered in the same study where Mira had first learned about the vampire world. The three of them plus Serafina, who Mira was beginning to realize was more friend than mere advisor. "You saved my life tonight," Lucian said, looking at Mira with an intensity that made her skin warm. "That was incredibly stupid and impossibly brave." "Someone had to," Mira replied, "and everyone else was busy." "She has a point," Dimitri signed, grinning. "You were losing that fight." "I was not losing." "You were absolutely losing," Serafina interjected. "Varric had you on the defensive. Miss Vaughn's intervention changed the tide." Lucian glared at them all, but there was no heat in it. "Fine, I was struggling." "Happy?" "Thrilled," Dimitri signed. "My untouchable warrior king of a brother needed rescuing by a human teacher. This is the best night of my life despite the kidnapping." They all laughed, the tension of the evening finally breaking. It felt good, normal in a way that nothing about this situation should feel. They talked for hours, Dimitri catching Lucian up on 20 years of life among humans. Lucian sharing carefully edited stories of court politics that made Dimitri roll his eyes. Mira listened, fascinated by the glimpse into their relationship, into centuries of history and brotherhood. Finally, as dawn approached and Mira was struggling to keep her eyes open, Lucian called for a car to take her home. "We'll talk soon," he said at the door. "About everything. The school, Varric's allies who might still be lurking, your role in all this if you want one." "I want one," Mira said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "I want to help, to be part of this. Whatever this is, you already are." Lucian's hand came up to cup her cheek, his touch cool and gentle. "You've brought my brother back to me. You've shown courage that most vampires don't possess. You've changed everything." Mira's breath caught at the tenderness in his expression, the way he looked at her like she was something precious. "I just did what felt right. That's what makes you extraordinary." The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility. Then Dimitri appeared, signing with exaggerated innocence. "Am I interrupting something?" "Not at all," Lucian signed back, stepping away from Mira with obvious reluctance. "I was just saying good night." "Right, good night." Very formal and brotherly. Dimitri's grin was wicked. Nothing at all like two people who've been dancing around attraction all evening. "I'm leaving now," Mira announced, her face burning. "Before this gets more awkward." But Dimitri stopped her, pulling her into a gentle hug. "Thank you," he signed when he released her. "For everything, for teaching me, for seeing me as more than just a deaf vampire, for bringing my brother back. You've given me more than you know." "You did the same for me," Mira signed back. "You showed me that different doesn't mean less. That kindness and strength can coexist. That family is worth fighting for." Over the next few weeks, Mira's life transformed in ways she never anticipated. The school became real, funded by anonymous vampire donors, though everyone knew Lucian was behind it. They found a building, hired staff, began the process of creating something that would change lives. Mira worked 16-hour days and loved every exhausting minute. Dimitri became a regular at the palace again, slowly rebuilding his relationship with Lucian. They had dinner together twice a week, just the two of them, making up for lost time. Watching them together, seeing the easy affection return, filled Mira with joy. And Lucian became something Mira couldn't quite define. He showed up at the school construction site, offering input on accessibility features. He attended every planning meeting for the curriculum, his centuries of experience providing insights no one else could offer. He sent her thoughtful gifts, books on teaching methodology, rare texts on sign language history, a vintage typewriter she'd mentioned admiring once in passing. They spent hours talking about everything and nothing. He told her stories of living through the Renaissance, surviving the plague, watching human civilization evolve. She told him about growing up poor, fighting for education, losing her parents young and building a life from grief. They shared coffee at midnight in empty classrooms, walked through the underground city as he showed her its hidden wonders, sat in comfortable silence when words weren't necessary. The attraction between them grew impossible to ignore. Every accidental touch felt electric. Every prolonged glance carried weight. Mira found herself thinking about him constantly, about the way he moved, the sound of his laugh, the intensity of his focus when he listened to her speak. But she didn't act on it. He was a vampire king, immortal and powerful, with responsibilities that spanned centuries. She was a human teacher with a normal lifespan and mundane concerns. The gulf between them felt impossibly wide, until one evening, 2 months after the night at the warehouse, when everything changed. Mira was alone in the school, reviewing architectural plans by lamplight. Everyone else had gone home, but she couldn't sleep, too excited about watching her dream take physical form. She heard footsteps and looked up to find Lucian in the doorway, looking uncertain in a way she'd never seen him look before. "I need to talk to you," he said without preamble. "And I need you to let me finish before you respond, because if you interrupt, I'll lose my nerve." "Okay," Mira said slowly, setting down her plans. Lucian took a breath unnecessary for a vampire but apparently needed for courage. "I've lived for nearly 700 years. I've ruled kingdoms, survived wars, made decisions that affected thousands of lives. I've been confident in my choices, certain of my path. But you, Mira Vaughn, you've made me uncertain in the best possible way. I can't stop thinking about you. The way you signed to me in that hallway even though I terrified you. The way you negotiated like you were my equal even though you had no power. The way you charged into battle with a piece of rebar to save someone you barely knew. The way you love your students, build your dreams, see the good in creatures who've given you every reason to be afraid. You've brought light into my life, into Dimitri's life, into a world that had grown cold and lonely over centuries of living in shadows. And I know this is selfish, I know I'm asking too much, but I can't keep pretending I don't feel this. I can't keep acting like you're just a friend, just an ally, just someone I'm working with professionally. I'm falling in love with you, Mira. Actually, I don't think I'm falling, I think I've already fallen. Completely, irrevocably, in a way I haven't felt in centuries of existence. And I need you to know that even if you don't feel the same, even if the idea of being with a vampire king is terrifying or impossible or something you could never want." He finished, his chest heaving with unnecessary breath, his eyes blazing crimson with emotion. Mira stared at him, her mind reeling. "You're in love with me," she repeated, testing the words. Hopelessly. "Even though I'm human and fragile and I'll age while you stay the same? I don't care about any of that. I care about you. Your courage, your compassion, your stubborn refusal to be intimidated by things that should intimidate you. Your terrible jokes and your habit of signing even when no one who's deaf is around, and the way you scrunch your nose when you're concentrating. I care about all of it." "I'm scared," Mira admitted. "Your world is dangerous. Varric tried to kill you. There will be others." Will Lucian agreed. "But I'll spend eternity keeping you safe if you let me, and you're stronger than you think. You've already proven that. I'll get old. Gray hair, wrinkles, everything vampires don't experience. And I'll love every year, every change, every sign that you've lived fully. Aging is beautiful, Mira. It's something my kind gave up for immortality, and we don't appreciate what we've lost. I would be honored to witness your life, however long it lasts." Mira's vision blurred with tears. "This is insane. We barely know each other. It's been 2 months. I've had 2 months with you and centuries with others. You've made more impact in 8 weeks than most have made in lifetimes. Time isn't what matters. Connection is. Dimitri's going to be insufferable about this," Mira said, and she was laughing and crying simultaneously. "He predicted this before either of us did. My brother is far too observant for anyone's good." Lucian moved closer, his eyes searching hers. "Mira, I need to know. Is there any chance you feel the same? Any possibility that you could love someone like me? Could?" Mira reached up, her hand cupping his cool cheek. "Lucian, I already do. I think I started falling that first night when you talked about your brother with such pain and love in your voice. When you offered me funding not to buy my silence but to help me achieve dreams you barely knew. When you charged into danger to save Dimitri even though it was obviously a trap. You're not just a vampire king. You're the most extraordinary person I've ever met." The kiss, when it came, was gentle and desperate all at once. His lips were cool against hers, his hands careful on her waist like she was something precious that might break. Mira melted into him, into the impossible reality of kissing a vampire king in an empty school that existed because he believed in her dreams. When they broke apart, both breathless, her from need, him from emotion, Lucian rested his forehead against hers. "I want to court you properly," he said. "Old-fashioned dates, proper wooing, everything you deserve. I want to do this right." "I'd like that," Mira whispered. "Though maybe skip the part where you send a dozen roses to my classroom. My students would never let me hear the end of it. 2 dozen roses then. And chocolates, and a string quartet. You're impossible. I'm in love." They stayed like that for a long moment, holding each other in the empty school, vampire and human, building something impossible and perfect. Eventually, Lucian pulled out his phone, typing quickly. Moments later, Dimitri appeared in the doorway, taking in the scene with obvious delight. "Finally," he signed. "I was beginning to think I'd have to lock you in a room together." "How did you get here so fast?" Mira asked, signing simultaneously. "I've been waiting outside for an hour," Dimitri admitted. "Lucian texted me earlier saying he was going to confess. I wanted to be nearby in case it went poorly and he needed brotherly support. Or in case it went well and you both needed someone to celebrate with. It went well," Lucian signed, pulling Mira against his side. Very well, I can see that. Dimitri moved forward, pulling them both into a hug. I'm happy for you, both of you. You deserve this. They went to dinner after that, the three of them, at a vampire restaurant in the underground city where the food was designed for human palates, but the atmosphere was pure Gothic elegance. Other vampires stared, whispering about the king dining with a human and his prodigal brother, but Lucian ignored them all. His attention focused entirely on Mira. They talked about everything and nothing, making plans for the school's opening, laughing at Dimitri's stories about navigating modern technology, debating the merits of various historical periods Lucian had lived through. It felt natural, right? Like they'd been doing this for years instead of months. When Lucian walked Mira home that night, he kissed her at her door, slow and sweet and full of promise. I'll see you tomorrow, he said, and the day after that, and the day after that. For as long as you'll have me. That might be a while, Mira warned. I'm pretty stubborn. Good, I'm incredibly patient. Immortality provides excellent practice. Over the following months they built something real. Lucian courted her with old-world romance and modern consideration, always respectful of her boundaries, always attentive to her needs. He attended school events, charmed her colleagues, who thought he was just an eccentric wealthy donor, and learned to navigate the human world with renewed enthusiasm. Mira learned about vampire politics, became a bridge between human and vampire communities, used her skills to help establish communication protocols that benefited both groups. She sat in on court sessions, offering human perspective on policies that affected both species. The vampires who had initially dismissed her as a fragile human curiosity grew to respect her insight, her courage, her refusal to be intimidated. Dimitri thrived, splitting his time between the human and vampire worlds with newfound confidence. He started teaching sign language to vampire children, creating a program that helped deaf vampires, rare but not non-existent, feel less isolated. He and Lucian repaired their relationship fully, becoming not just brothers but friends again, partners in creating a more inclusive vampire society. The school opened 6 months after that night in the warehouse. It was beautiful, state-of-the-art, everything Mira had dreamed of and more. At the opening ceremony, with students and parents and staff all gathered, Lucian stood beside her, holding her hand where everyone could see. Thank you, Mira whispered to him as she watched students explore their new classrooms. For believing in this, for making it real. You made it real, Lucian corrected. I just provided resources. The vision, the dedication, the love that built this place, that's all you. That night, after the celebration ended, Lucian took Mira to a private balcony overlooking the underground city. They stood together watching the lights, his arms around her waist, her back pressed against his chest. Mira Vaughn, he said softly, his breath cool against her ear. I have something to ask you and I need you to understand that there's no pressure. Whatever you decide, it changes nothing about how I feel. He turned her to face him, dropping gracefully to one knee. From his pocket he produced a ring, ancient and beautiful, set with a stone that seemed to hold starlight. This ring has been in my family for 400 years. Waiting for someone worthy of wearing it. I never thought I'd find that person. I thought I'd rule alone for eternity, that love was something I'd experienced and lost in my youth, never to return. Then a brave teacher used sign language with my brother, and showed me that miracles still exist in the world. You've changed everything, Mira. You've brought joy back into my life, reunited me with my brother, helped me see purpose beyond mere survival. You've made immortality feel like a gift instead of a curse. Because I get to spend it watching you change the world. I know you're mortal. I know we'll have decades together, not centuries. And I treasure that all the more because it's limited, because every moment with you is precious and unrepeatable. I want to spend every one of those moments as your husband if you'll have me. Mira Vaughn, love of my long life, will you marry me? Mira's tears fell freely, her hands shaking as she reached for him. Yes, she said, signing and speaking simultaneously. Yes, absolutely, completely yes. Lucian slipped the ring onto her finger, then stood and kissed her with all the passion of nearly 700 years of existence. Around them, the underground city seemed to glow brighter, or maybe that was just her happiness making everything luminous. We should tell Dimitri, Mira said when they finally broke apart. He's going to be impossible about this. He's going to claim he predicted it from the beginning. He did predict it from the beginning, then we'll never hear the end of it. They went to find Dimitri together, hand in hand. Vampire king and human teacher, impossibly in love and ready to build a life that bridged two worlds. They found him in the palace library, reading by lamplight, and when he saw the ring on Mira's finger, his face split into the biggest smile either of them had ever seen. Finally, he signed. Do you know how long I've been waiting for this? I already have my best man speech written. We haven't set a date yet, Lucian signed back, exasperated and amused. Don't care. Speech is written. It's beautiful and embarrassing, and you're both going to cry. They spent the night celebrating, the three of them, talking about wedding plans and the future and all the impossibilities that had become real. At some point, Serafina appeared with champagne, which vampires could drink, even if it didn't affect them, and soon half the court had joined them, celebrating their king's engagement with genuine joy. The wedding took place 3 months later, held in the underground city in a cathedral that had stood for centuries. It was a blend of human and vampire traditions, officiated by both a human minister and a vampire elder. Mira wore white, traditional and beautiful, while Lucian wore formal vampire attire that made him look like he'd stepped out of a Gothic painting. Dimitri was best man, exactly as threatened, and his speech was indeed beautiful and embarrassing. He talked about growing up with a twin who never made him feel less than whole, about losing that brother to duty and distance, about the miracle of a kind teacher who brought them back together. By the end, there wasn't a dry eye in the cathedral, vampire or human. Mira's vows were simple. Lucian, you've shown me that love isn't limited by mortality or species or the boundaries we think define us. You've taught me that courage means being vulnerable, that strength means allowing yourself to need others, that immortality is worthless without someone to share it with. I can't promise you forever, but I can promise you every moment I have, and I will love you with everything I am for all the time we're given. Lucian's vows were equally direct. Mira, you've given me a reason to celebrate immortality instead of enduring it. You've shown me that even after centuries of existence, life can still surprise me, still move me, still fill me with wonder. I will protect you, cherish you, love you with every breath you take. And when your mortal life ends, I will carry you in my heart for all the centuries that remain, grateful for whatever time we had. They kissed as husband and wife, and the cathedral erupted in applause. Human and vampire guests celebrated together, the barriers between their worlds dissolving in shared joy. The reception was magnificent, held in the palace ballroom, with food and music and dancing that lasted until dawn. Mira danced with Lucian, with Dimitri, with Serafina, with vampires who had become friends and human colleagues who were still processing the fact that vampires were real. It was perfect, chaotic, beautiful, everything a wedding should be. Later, much later, when the celebration had wound down and most guests had departed, Lucian and Mira stood on the palace balcony watching the underground city's lights dim for the day cycle. Dimitri joined them, the three of them standing together in comfortable silence. Thank you, Lucian signed to his brother, for coming back, for forgiving me for the years we lost, for accepting Mira into our family. She was always family, Dimitri signed back. From the moment she saw me as a person instead of a deaf vampire. From the moment she cared enough to learn my language, she belongs with us. Mira leaned against Lucian's side, his arms wrapping around her automatically. I never imagined my life would turn out like this, she signed. Teaching sign language to a vampire prince, falling in love with a king, becoming part of a world I didn't know existed. It's like something from a fairy tale. The best fairy tales are the ones we don't see coming, Dimitri signed. The ones that find us when we're just trying to live our lives, doing the work we love. You were just being yourself, Mira. That's what made all this possible. They stayed on the balcony until the artificial sun began to rise in the underground city's ceiling, painting everything in shades of gold and pink. Then they went inside together, three people bound by love and circumstance, and the magic of connection that transcends every boundary. The years that followed were full and rich. Mira's school thrived, expanding to multiple locations, becoming a model for inclusive education. She and Lucian navigated the challenges of a mixed marriage with grace and humor, finding compromises between human and vampire needs. They traveled together, Lucian showing her centuries of history through his eyes, Mira showing him the modern world through hers. Dimitri became an advocate for deaf vampires, his work changing laws and attitudes throughout vampire society. He found love too, eventually, with a human man who was learning sign language at Mira's school. The four of them had dinners together weekly, laughing at the impossibility of their lives, grateful for every moment Mira aged as humans do. Gray appeared in her hair, lines formed around her eyes. Her hands grew less steady. Lucian loved every change, documented every year, with the devotion of someone who knew how precious and fleeting it all was. He was there for every milestone, every triumph, every challenge. They grew old together in the way that mattered most, in love, in partnership, in shared purpose. On their 25th anniversary, sitting in the same study where they'd first truly talked, Mira looked at her husband and signed, "Thank you for a beautiful life." Thank you for showing me what life could be. Lucian signed back, his movements practiced now, fluent. Every moment with you has been a gift. I'm not done yet, Mira signed, grinning. I've got at least another 25 years in me. I'm counting on it. And she did, living fully and joyfully until she was 93, surrounded by students whose lives she'd changed, vampires whose world she'd helped transform, and a vampire king who held her hand as she took her last breath, whispering promises that he'd carry her memory until the end of his immortal days. Lucian kept that promise. He ruled for centuries more, always with Mira's picture in his study, always signing when he spoke even though it wasn't necessary anymore. He established the Mira Vaughn Foundation for Inclusive Education, funding schools across the world. He made sure deaf vampires were represented in vampire government, that human-vampire relations continued to improve, that the work they'd started together continued long after she was gone. And on quiet nights when the palace was empty and the underground city slept, he'd stand on that same balcony where he'd proposed and remember the teacher who'd used sign language with his brother, who'd been brave enough to love a vampire king, who'd shown him that even immortality could be transformed by a mortal life. Dimitri stayed by his brother's side through it all, a reminder that family transcends death, that love outlasts loss, that the connections we make echo through centuries. They grew old together in the way that vampires do not embody but in wisdom, in memory, in understanding of what truly matters. The school Mira founded still stands, a monument to the belief that everyone deserves to be seen, heard, understood. And in its main hall hangs a plaque with a simple message, written in English and sign language. Communication is love made visible. Mira Vaughn, Ashford founder. It was the truth she'd lived by, the gift she'd given to everyone who knew her. The poor teacher who used sign language with a vampire prince and ended up transforming an entire world, one conversation, one connection, one act of kindness at a time. And though she was mortal and he was eternal, though their time together was brief by vampire standards, what they built together lasted forever, a bridge between worlds, a family forged from understanding, a love story that proved some things transcend even death itself. In the end, that was Mira's greatest lesson, that the most powerful magic isn't supernatural at all. It's the simple, radical act of seeing another person truly, completely, without judgment or fear. It's the courage to communicate across every barrier, to love across every boundary, to believe that connection is always possible if we're willing to reach out our hands and sign, speak, show each other we care. That was the gift she gave Lucian, gave Dimitri, gave every student who passed through her schools. And it was the gift they gave back, multiplied and magnified, spreading through generations until kindness became legacy and love became eternal. The Vampire King never forgot the teacher who changed his world, and in the centuries that followed, he made sure the world never forgot her either.